Hello, everyone. Namaste, and thank you for joining me as we're closing 2023 and stepping into 2024. So, Happy New Year. And today we're going to do a forecast for the collective energies in the West Coast. And it is going to be the West Coast because the ascendant changes as we move to other time zones. So, for the West Coast time zone, that would be in the US, Washington and Nevada, Oregon, um, of course, California, and it also includes Western Canada and Western Mexico. So if you're in those areas, then this forecast would be for you. So let's begin. So first of all, let's do a 2023 recap to kind of see our starting point for 2024. So in 2023, it was a partnership heavy year, and you'll see 2024 is the same, but with a different flavor. So in 2023, we evaluated if our partnerships actually support the long-term sustainability and structural integrity of our larger communities. So, in short, we've had to weigh our partnerships against the goals and purposes of our larger communities and see if those partnership goals align with our community goals. And also, we cared about social justice and structures that are beneficial for all community members, not just the few. So the collective looked into who's aligned with the well-being of the community and who's not. So, and in 2023, there was no hiding. We've had our spidey senses on for the full year. And so if we feel that there were members who were not aligned with a common goal, it was there for all to see. And then we also checked to see if our public personas were in alignment with our spiritual values. And it was okay that we couldn't really connect the two together quite yet. The point was that we wanted or we were desiring a consistency between what we do in the world and what we actually believe in spiritually. And also, we cleared house, considered which partners brought us purpose in life, and was able to create meaning with us and who couldn't. And a lot of secrets were aired out, sometimes unwittingly, but basically it was a year where we couldn't hide what was really behind the scenes. And sort of necessary information surfaced so that we could determine what was right for us and what's not. And again, in 2023, what was right for us was also in alignment with our understanding of what our larger communities needed and also what we needed spiritually. And also, there were direct communications on what we think, sometimes just a little too direct, but also sometimes daring greatly with expressing vulnerability and sometimes unleashing the sort of deeper and darker thoughts that are a little harsher to listen to. And chances are we've all had a mix of doing this to others versus others doing that to us being on the receiving end. So, it's either we like it or not. There was this sort of back and forth of being direct to others in terms of what we think, or in the reverse, being the receiver of somebody else's thoughts, or sometimes confrontations. So there was a sense of aggression overall in the collective zeitgeist, and our compassion was tested because the energy just wasn't there for us to feel things from the heart per se. It was more of a thought to expressions directly. The link between thought and our mouth and our expressions are more direct. It doesn't really go through the heart, even though we wanted to align to our higher self, our spirituality. But last year, or, this year, this entire year, 2023, was mostly about just spitting it out. So now let's look at 2024 collective energies and visions. So what's happening this year? We are in a Cancer ascendant year. Cancer ascendant is right there. So we're nurturing ground zero in partnerships. Now we're actually trying to find security and inner stability. In a Cancer year, after we've gone through those partnership shifts in 2023, this year, the energy is a little more nurturing. So instead of huge tower moments and shakeups, we're now looking for a little more security and inner stability. And we are starting to vision the new hope after we find that inner stability. And the aggressiveness of 2023 will subside in favor of intimacy and emotional sensitivity. And there's going to be more empathy available. The energy will be more available. And we can become more sensitive and sometimes more trigger happy. With Cancers and Cancer ascendants, any Cancer placements with the personal planets, we can become trigger happy. So be aware of self-victimization. When in doubt, communicate. The energies are there for mutual understanding this year, for sort of not only the verbal back and forth, but the emotional exchange, the energy for it, that emotional exchange, heart exchange is there. And this year we are desiring and making solid plans to form partnerships. Last year was about determining if existing partnerships are sustainable. And this year, after the shakeup, we want to concretize. We want to form new partnerships that can be sustainable on the long run. And it has to be mutually agreed and agreed through a structure of communications. And for this, we're looking to Venus and Mars, because we see Venus and Mars actually conjuncting in the 7th house. So there is that willingness to make partnership work. And we're looking for deep partnerships that can aid us in our long-term goals. And the key is communication. Mercury is always around the sun, since this is, I forgot to mention. So to get to the collective energies, we're actually looking into the Lunar New Year chart, because the Lunar New Year chart is always the new moon chart for Aquarius, which is the sign for communities, which is the sign for collectives, which is the sign for that forward moving momentum, the revolutionary, the transformations that are coming. It's futuristic, it's community oriented. So that's why we use the new moon in Aquarius to project the visions, the wishes, the goals that we will have as a collective for that entire year. And I guess the Chinese are smart because because they use the Aquarius new moon as a marker for the start of the year. So pretty much Aquarius new moon is the lunar New Year chart. So that's why we're using the Aquarius new moon to do the yearly forecast. And yes, so with the new moon chart, the sun will always conjunct the moon because that is the new moon. It's right there. Let me get the cursor. It is right there. That's the new moon conjuncting the sun. And Mercury will always be less than 28 degrees around the sun. So, you know, in terms of communications, that just tells you communications is always important with the collective. It just is always critical, is always crucial. But because it can be 28 degrees apart from the sun, it could be a sign forward or a sign behind from the sun. It just happens that this year, Mercury and Pluto are also in Aquarius. So we are experimenting and forging new ways of communication when it comes to our partnerships. Okay. So now let's look into 2024 communications a little more. Let's dive in to what that is. So communications for long-term success, as Mercury and Pluto sits right there, Mercury and Pluto sits with a new moon in Aquarius this year. We are engaging in ground zero talks in front of the rubbles. I call it the rubbles of our lives, as many things disintegrated with the Pluto transits last year. Either old or new relationships. It's about discussing how to have a new collective vision. And we're not talking about having clear goals just yet. Goals meaning that we have action items and details and to-dos and tasks. We're just talking about visions that allow each stakeholder to feel secure in the bond, to feel like there is a shared future or legacy. So it's less about passion or inspiration this year when it comes to partnerships. And the very interesting thing is that Uranus is tempered harmoniously by Venus in the 7th house this year. So Venus is right there, Uranus is right there, and they are in a trinal position this year. So they're in a harmonious aspect, and with Venus being the 7th house. So that means we're more likely to approach each other in a structured and consistent way. And we are building rapport systematically. It's not, touch and go. And it's also not sort of the aggressiveness that we've seen last year. This year, it is systematic. So even when the environment is one of change, there's something about communications this year that is very structured. So the example that I wrote down is like, with a huge corporation and company, instead of the CEO just calling random shots, which I know some of us have experienced last year, there would be more structured monthly communications or consistent communications in discussing the potential of restructuring, versus last year was more sudden. We saw the sudden decision makings that are a little more top down. So next, we have third house of communication in Virgo, which looks to seventh house Mercury. So third house of communication is Virgo, and it looks to Mercury in the seventh. So we would be more likely to consider our partner's perspectives in negotiations, either personal or business. And the 12th house also looks to Mercury in the seventh. So 12th house this year is in Gemini, which is also ruled by Mercury. So Mercury is right there. So it indicates that we look to our partners or alliances this year to fulfill our needs for the spiritual or transcendental or some sort of higher purpose or calling. It's very similar to last year in terms of wanting to align our partnership goals, our partnership visions with the higher goals, with our spiritual visions. So it's actually very, very similar to that. Okay. So now we want to look into the work sector and luck in the work sector. So for 2024, our personal identities and beliefs are still in flux. So when we actually do have a clear sense of who we are, it's easier to market ourselves, to say who we are, and to express who we are. But this year, we're still building the foundations of our new identity based on mutual goals. So the prosperity path for 2024 is about being open and available to shape a common identity and shared visions, and not necessarily about just blasting out what we think and see who comes along and who's able to support us on the way. This year, we're a little more open to meeting people in the middle and to sort of allow that co-creation to reshape our personal identity. So there's more of an interplay of me and you this year. And also there's a lot of luck in the work sector for the collective. Jupiter in 10th house. Jupiter is actually in 10th house of career for the Aquarius New Moon chart, which is very auspicious. And Jupiter in the 10th is actually corresponding to the 6th house ingress. So 6th house is right there, and the ingress is Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter sits in the 10th house. So that means that we're more able to orient our daily routines toward career and professional expansion this year, or in other terms, our daily routines are more able to assist in our rise in social status or career or whatever it is that we wish to expand in terms of what we want in our career, because sometimes the logistics can pull us down. The logistics can be, an extra burden to where we want to be professionally, where we want to be in terms of our sort of social reputation. But this year, they are talking to each other. This year, they are in support of each other. So that's actually very auspicious. And starting January 1st, 2024, which is coming up, Jupiter will turn direct. It's been in retrograde for the past couple of months in 2023, and it's going to turn direct right on the first day of 2024, and it's going to enter Gemini end of May, and then it's going to retrograde in Gemini early October, and then it's going to go direct again in Gemini in February of 2025. So we have the theme of securing partnerships for the first half of the year, because Jupiter would be in Taurus, and Taurus is ruled by Venus, and Venus is in the 7th house of partnerships. So for that first half of the year before May 25th, when Jupiter enters Gemini, relationship is still sort of center focus. We're securing partnerships. Then comes communications to try to oil the cogs, grease the wheels of communication, and work out the kinks. Because then Jupiter would be in Gemini, which is all about communications. And it's really interesting that these communications will actually be done in a more intimate and private setting with a little more mutuality this year. So as opposed to just, again, bullhorning or declaring our own personal stance. In 2023, now we're more about mutuality, meeting the other person in the middle. And what we did for the entire 2023, which was about blasting who we are and really claiming a stance on who we are, is fine, because it allowed us to restructure accordingly, to either break alliances or form new alliances accordingly, either personally or in terms of business. So it's all a part of the process. Okay. So moving on. Another theme for 2024 is Ubuntu. So for that, we are looking into the North Node and South Node of the chart. So North Node is right there, and South Node is right there. So the North Node and South Node rulers, Mars and Venus, conjunct in the 7th house, squaring the nodes. So here's, again, Mars and Venus. And the ruler of the North Node is Mars here in the 7th house. And the ruler of South Node is in Libra, which is here also in the 7th house, conjuncting with each other. I mean, 6 degrees apart. It's not, straightforward conjunction, but it is, in my book, it is close enough. So this year, our collective lesson is to meet in the middle in a practical and structured way. And this will feel foreign compared to the Mars in first house in Gemini that we've experienced last year. It was more of a singular trailblazing spirit, you know, blasting off on what we are and who we are. We're going to be shifting gears to practice the spirit of Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. And another interpretation is about negotiating between family needs and career needs, because we see the South Node in the 4th house and the North Node in the 10th house. So this also has meanings of the personal care needs versus societal needs. So in terms of the South Node, where have we sacrificed our ambitions for family or partners? And partners will be much more sympathetic to this need for balance and be able to meet somewhere in the middle this year. And the point being that we want to rebuild our identity and reputation in the world, meaning we want to move towards the 10th house of public reputation, of social status, of career, of our professional outlook. So we want to rebuild that world. So old wounds can be triggered in practicing Ubuntu I am because we are, because Chiron sits with North Node opposing South Node this year. So Chiron right there, together with North Node opposing South Node. So past wounding endured in our career or social reputation can resurface for us. It's asking us to communicate the experience in a more constructive manner that heals the experience, instead of just emotionally projecting all circumstances onto new partnerships or the renewal of old ones. And this year, because Chiron, along with the North Node, is actually in the 10th house, whatever is in the 10th house, you can't hide. There's no place to hide. So the wound is right there. The wound is on your sleeves, like the heart's on the sleeve. Literally, like with Cancer ascendant, this year our hearts are on our sleeves. So with Chiron and North Node together, there's no place to hide these wounds, or the wounds can simply be so easily triggered in the public arena that we don't even have time to react or hide anything. So just be aware of that and aware of the potential triggers that can come up to deter the progress of where we want to be with the potential partnerships or new partnerships. And then Cheriklo is near the new moon in 8th. So Cheriklo is right there. Cheriklo is the wife of Chiron, who heals, who is healing, and who heals through awareness, through silent awareness. She's a healing presence, so it's healing through presence. And she is near the new moon in 8th. So when sort of the open communication fails, the suggestion here is to be vulnerable in a more intimate one-on-one setting, one-on-one situation, where it's easier for empathy and compassion to flow, and potentially lead to deeper understanding for both parties. And that's with or without actually getting at a solution. The point is having gone through the process of that back and forth. So for this year, that process of back and forth, of making the effort to meet in the middle is going to be front and center. And again, if, you know, if it's really hard to communicate in a group situation, the suggestion, what's given in the chart, is to sort of go to establish a more private line of communication and talk on the sidelines, establish a sort of inner understanding, sort of a heart-to-heart connection. I mean, it's sometimes it's really hard to talk heart-to-heart in a very corporate situation, I understand. For those who are looking into intimate relationships, I totally go for the heart-to-heart. But for those looking into business situations, what I'm saying here is simply to establish sort of a private understanding on the side first, to recognize the other person's position on the side, and just simply establish that acknowledgement. We're not even looking for a solution. It's just establishing acknowledgement of the other person, the other person's position. And then once you have that established, then move back into the group discussion. And that will allow a much more flowing group communication this year, because it is key, really, to concretizing that partnership, to really make it work, to make it sustainable. Okay. So now let's look at notable transits. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through too many of them. So one of them is Jupiter, which we've already talked about, with the Jupiter going direct early in January 1st in 2024, and then going to Gemini, and then retrograding in Gemini, and then moving forward in Gemini again next year. So look into that in terms of the progression that you're making in the work sector. So when Jupiter goes backwards and forwards, what I find in my own personal experience is that there would be reconsiderations in whatever it is that I'm trying to expand and work on in the Jupiter position. And this year, collectively, it's 10th house profession. So whatever that we're trying to work on professionally, sort of notice the reconsiderations, the restructurings that could happen near the second half of the year. And just know that if restructuring happens again, it's okay. It's for the better. You know, just allow the reconsideration to happen, to maybe re-engage old ideas to see if we've actually left out ideas or visions that are actually really good. So the key point, because it's going to be in Gemini, the key point really, as we said in the communication slide, it's all about meeting in the middle in terms of communications and establishing that private line when it's necessary, not to get any sort of solution, not to be goal-oriented, but to simply acknowledge each other. That is the key. Okay, so in terms of Jupiter, another position or event that every astrologer is looking into is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, because it happens, oh shoot, it's either, I think it's every 7 years. Yeah, don't quote me on it, but if I remember correctly, it happens every 7 years. So it's rare enough for it to be a good marker for some sort of shift or change. So Jupiter-Uranus will conjunct in or on April 20th, 2024, at 21 degrees 50 minutes of Taurus, and it will conjunct in the 7th house in the collective chart. So this is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction chart, and you can see the conjunction here, which, you know, synchronistically, it falls in the 7th house for us in the West Coast. Really interesting, right? So, so for our collective chart, it's emphasizes innovations and also innovating new ways in partnerships. And as you can see here, the white moon Lilith right here, it's at 22 degrees. So that's actually a very tight conjunction in my book. And with that conjunction, there's a potential for sort of an expansion of awareness, our own understanding of what partnerships and relationships can look like, can be like. And it could potentially blow our minds in terms of our own new realizations that could be completely beyond the traditional. So there could very well be a renewal of relationship values that could sort of lead the way for the next generation. You know, we can totally see that with each generation, there are new paradigms of relationships that are being formed. You know, how we see relationships now is, of course, already different from how people see relationships 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, so on and so forth. So we're sort of resetting, we're opening up to new ideas of what relationship partnerships could be. And it's going to be, no matter what I say right now, it's not going to be that. With Uranus, it's unexpected. So I don't know what that paradigm is going to be, but it is going to be a new paradigm that set new standards for the upcoming generations. And I mean, if I were to hazard a projection, I'm pretty sure it's going to be beyond this, but if I were to hazard a projection, it could mean like new dating apps that break old paradigms, or new ways of dating online, new ways of connecting that just totally blows our minds. Or it could mean unlikely partnerships, the coming together of unlikely people, corporations, partnerships that actually work. And, you know, as I was preparing the slides, I was thinking in terms of Star Trek. One of my favorite shows ever. So it's kind of like Vulcans partnering up with Klingons. No such thing has happened ever in the Star Trek canon. It just does not happen in the Star Trek canon. But it's like we're moving into a new place in partnership, a new age in partnerships, where that's what we're doing. We're pairing up Vulcans with Klingons for something that is totally unconventional from the outside and seemingly set up to fail, but somehow it works. And with potential very, very, very long-term implications where it is generations down the road where we cannot see. So, you know, in sort of today's YouTube terms or social media terms, it's like unlikely features. You know, like maybe a violinist featuring a marine biologist, you know, somehow Lindsay Sterling playing violin, you know, for the Dolphins, something like that. It's just very unlikely feats that can come into just our sphere of understanding, our consciousness. Like suddenly we see that as a potential, whereas before we don't even think of it. So it's almost like the weirder, the more eye-catching, the better in this new world. You know, I just find that really interesting. And I'm also interested to see, you know, what quirky, weird, unlikely partnerships can happen um, in this coming year. Okay. So another notable transit, we're going to be looking at Pluto. And, you know, when you think we're done with Pluto, with all the uprisings in 2023, you think we're done. We're not done. You know, Pluto is still going direct and retrograde and direct again. So starting this year, January 1st, Pluto is going to go direct in Capricorn. Isn't that interesting, right? Jupiter goes direct as well as Pluto on January 1st. And then Pluto is going to enter Aquarius in that same month, January 20th. And then May 2nd, it's going to go retrograde again, you know, along the same time that Jupiter is going to go retrograde. They're off by maybe 2 weeks, but still. And then September 1st, Pluto's is going to retrograde back. It's going to hit the 0 point in Aquarius and then retrograde back into Capricorn. And then it's going to be in Capricorn until I don't mean Capricorn, but it's going to be in retrograde in Capricorn until October 11th when it goes direct in the last degree, 29 degree of Capricorn, before it enters Aquarius again in November 19th. And then going forward, more into Aquarius, or it's going to be at 1 degree Aquarius by the end of the year. So as you can see, we are not done with Pluto transits. And for me, it doesn't really sort of end in terms of this Capricorn and Aquarius transit conversation until around Thanksgiving 2024. Even though it starts to go direct in October, it doesn't get out of Capricorn and enter Aquarius until November 19th. And Pluto goes really, really slow. So I really don't think we leave the Pluto transit in Capricorn until around Thanksgiving time in 2024. So before Thanksgiving 2024, we're going to be doing any last bit of restructuring and purging of old systems that's not been completed in 2023. And, you know, I've heard here and there on the internet or, you know, just people talking that there would still be waves of layoffs or shifts, restructurings in 2024. The way that I'm seeing it astrologically is that the waves are smaller compared to 2023 because Pluto isn't retrograding back to Capricorn beyond like maybe 20 some minutes. Like it only retrogrades back in Capricorn, not even up to 1 degree. So for me, that means the scales of these restructurings would be on a smaller side. I feel like the big waves already have come this year. At least, you know, I'm not talking about anyone outside of the Pacific time zone. I'm just talking about the Pacific time zone, because Pluto sits in the 7th house for us in the Pacific time zone, which is, again, partnerships, business, we're personal. So for business, there's still changes, mergers and acquisitions, so on and so forth, that really impact the workforce. So there's still going to be smaller waves in 2024. But the impact, because it is 29°, the impact would seem larger and more indicative of future developments and directions. So what does that mean? So for the waves, for the changes, for the restructurings that happened last year, they were in big waves and big droves. However, we couldn't really understand. There was no understanding of why, why are we doing this, or why are we restructuring? Like, no one had a clear idea of why what was done, and in what direction are we going to move towards, after these shifts, after these turbulence, after these restructures. No one knew. But this year, even when the waves were smaller, there would be more indications of why these changes were done. And we would be able to see the new direction of where the whole system is going to go, where the direction of this group or corporation is going to go after those changes. So it's going to be clearer. There's more clarity around future developments and directions, even within these changes. So I hope that makes sense. And with the continuing turbulence around restructuring old systems and negotiating partnerships, or either old or new, litigations and legal actions can arise more frequently this year because, again, South Node is in Libra, and the rulers for North Node and South Node conjuncts in the 7th house of relationship or legal means of conflict resolution. So South Node and North Node have been in Libra, I believe, since July of 2023. And the reason why there would be more legal concerns this year is because Mars and Venus, the rulers of the nodes, are conjunct in the 7th house, whereas last year they're elsewhere. But this year, the rulers of South Node and North Node conjunct in the 7th house, which is, again, about conflict resolution. Sometimes it gets to that point. So on a sort of on an easier scale, on a more casual scale, it's just talking, it's just discussing, it's just meeting the other person in the middle and acknowledging each other, which is great. But on the extreme legal end, it is going to the courts to resolve something in order to be fair, because, as we know, 7th house's original ruler is Libra. Libra is all about the scales. So the scales of justice is involved, and especially with Capricorn, right? Capricorn is about systems, and what systems of justice? It's the legal system. So just watch for that. That's why I say this year, if you feel like there's something coming up, like it's starting, you're starting to feel the friction in communications, establish that private line of communication. Acknowledge the other person. I cannot stress that enough for 2024. Acknowledge the other person. It doesn't mean that you are sacrificing your position. It doesn't mean that you have to give in and be a wimp and be a pushover and be a doormat. That's not what I'm saying. It's saying that we are acknowledging the other party. And if we're doing this for each other, then we would likely be on the receiving end as well. We would actually feel more acknowledged by people. And with that acknowledgement, we are more likely to actually hear the maybe great ideas of the opposing party or the partnering party. So that's how it's going to work this year. So when you feel that friction, don't let it just go and let it fester, let it be magnified, because this year has, legal implications. So again, to reach that sort of resolution without legal involvement, practice compassion towards the others, self-compassion, and of course, active listening without needing to be right. People want to be heard, they want to be recognized. So it's good to have sort of a level of skillful and wise vulnerability in your pocket this year. And I'm actually giving you skillful and wise vulnerability as a tool. It's an active tool for you this year to have right in your pocket. Like our pockets, our personal tools can be, multi-directional. It could be, span, a gamut of different uses, different utilizing different strategies. But this year, we want the skillful, wise, or I'll just call it wise vulnerability, skillful vulnerability at the shallow end of our pocket, where it is easily accessed and reachable. And of course, I'm not saying you should throw vulnerability everywhere. It's, again, establish an environment of mutual safety first, and then reveal and acknowledge that vulnerability with each other. With Cancer ascendant, you could have either extremes, right? You could have the skillful, wise vulnerability and established in a safe environment that leads to just a lot of deeper understanding, which leads to just a higher frequency, a higher form of co-creation. Whereas you maybe, when you get to the lower extreme of vulnerability, we're just starting each other with our own emotions. And that's not what we're looking for. And we also don't want to open up and get hurt when the environment is unprotected, especially in the business environment. I do understand that vulnerability can get tricky. But again, when we're talking about skillful and wise vulnerability, we're talking about already establishing, a mutual harbor, a mutual sort of safety zone, that when we do this, we recognize that we are in a safety zone, and then we can be a little more vulnerable. So build that rapport. It's not going to come automatic. Build that rapport. That's going to be key to success this year. Build that mutual sense of safety and don't abuse it, right? Do not build that mutual safety zone only to sabotage it, only to betray it. In the future, notice what you're doing. Notice your intention, and then protect that safety zone because it benefits all of us this year. Okay. Moving on. So a couple of retrogrades, just want to mention it in passing. I don't really want to focus on it too much. So Mars retrograde will happen December. It's going to be way towards the end of the year, December 6th, through the following year in 2025, February 2025. And then Jupiter is going to retrograde October 9th through February of next year. We mentioned that. And Saturn's going to retrograde pretty much second half of the year. And Uranus is going to retrograde second half of the year towards the fall. Neptune's going to retrograde second half of the year starting summer. Pluto retrograde May through October, middle of the year, as we mentioned. and there's sort of a retrograde crescendo or cluster in October and December. I know that sounds like a lot, right? But just I want to remind everybody, planets retrograde all the time. If we look at historical yearly retrograde overlaps, it's very common to have many at the same time. And as you'll notice, I didn't list Mercury retrograde because it just happens 3 to 4 times a year. It's just way too common for me to list it. So retrograde is not a good reason to do or not do things. And this is me speaking personally, experientially. I've tried to avoid things and I've tried to go ahead. And I feel like for some reason, if I'm connected with enough clarity, it's the retrogrades are really not about avoiding things. Rather, it's actually about this added focus, sort of this an added emphasis on a particular theme or reconsideration of a particular thing. It does not mean that you don't go into action. So when it's the outer planets that go retrograde, it indicates an added focus on a particular collective theme. So retrograde is not only, regression of progress, but it's an emphasis on a reconsideration or a reworking or recycling of ideas. It's the it's the prefix re. It doesn't mean not do it. And if it's personal planets retrograding, similar idea, it indicates personal emphasis and reconsideration. So again, we love retrogrades because, it's something different on the chart. As astrologers, it's easy to be pulled into it, but I feel like we have to come back to the experience. Each time that I observe myself and what I do in retrogrades, I have to make that mental note and say, you know what? This is what actually happened. For instance, Mercury retrograde, we've just somehow are so, as culturally, collectively, we've become Mercury retrograde avoidant. And I say that we have to come back to the experience. And the experience for me has always been sort of a reconsideration of something, a reworking of something. I have signed contracts during Mercury retrogrades with just normalcy, normal effects. And it could be paired with another experience of, needing to download a certain software, but it turns out the software doesn't really meet my requirements. So I've had to return that software and get a new one. But, it's like without that experience of getting that first software initially, how would I have the experience to reconsider? So I'm not saying this would hold true for you. Maybe for someone, because of how their natal chart is oriented, Mercury retrograde or any other retrograde can form a little more impact. I'm not denying that. What I'm saying is notice what your actual experience is before we jump into fear. Because as an astrologer myself, sometimes I recognize that we unwittingly spread fear sometimes through focusing on the retrograde aspects, because it's just like news. It's people want to hear about catastrophes, more clicks to report catastrophes than to report what is harmonious, what is loving, what is working, blah, 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 blah. So I'm going to go against that trend and look into what can work this year. So look to Venus this year for stability, because Venus does stay in a forward moving motion this year. So it's very synchronistic to a relationship dominant year, right? So it just feels like both the collective and the personal energies will want to move forward in these partnerships. And on an individual level, what I personally encourage is to know your Venus. Why? Because you want to know your relational style, your characteristics, and your needs in relational communication in order to co-create with the collective energy this year. Because remember, we talked about how this year is about establishing that safe line of communication to be able to acknowledge each other. And sometimes, we all have different relational styles. So it's going to be really helpful to know what your relational style is this year. And that's just your natal position. And you can use the transit Venus for emphasis on, okay, where's Venus right now in the sky? If you don't know, consult astro.com for your natal position or transit position. So we want to look at transit Venus for the emphasis on the where and the how you can further improve your relationship in the moment. So it's almost like, okay, let's say your Venus is in Taurus in the second house. Let's just use the natural chart. So your Venus is in Taurus in the second house. You learn that sort of your relational style is there's more of a physicality to it. You like to feel. You like the touch, you like the hug, you like the physicality and the materiality, you like the exchange of gifts, so on and so forth. But you can also look into the transit Venus. So for instance, if Venus is transiting, where's Venus transiting this year? Let me see. Let's say your Venus is transiting, let's just say the 10th house, because Venus is in the 10th house, will be in the 10th house for the New Year chart. So Venus being in the 10th house means that for that start of the year, from January to February, you could actually advance in communications in your work sector, in your career sector. You can focus in that arena during that time because the actual Venus would be transiting in Capricorn, which would sit in the 10th house for a natural chart meaning that Aries would be in your ascendant. So that's just an example of how you can use your natal Venus and the transit Venus to work for your relational advancement this year. So here's just a short, easy reference for if you don't know what your natal Venus means. Feel free to go on cafeastrology.com. They have like little short write-ups of what Venus in each sign and Venus in each house would mean. Or if you're looking to transit Venus, also resources available with Cafe Astrology. Just, with a video presentation, go ahead and type in the actual address. It's not too long, so it should be easy to type in. And then when you're in overwhelm, I would suggest to do your moon, as the Cancer ascendant year can feel really vulnerable and will require our basic needs to be met to feel secure and padded for emotional resilience. So what do I mean by do your moon? So it's basically short remedies to shake out the funk, to get out of those darker moods or funk, or, the harsher moods where it's harder for us to access compassion or equanimity. So if you have a fire moon, either it's Aries, Leo, Sagittarius in terms of the sign or the house, first house, fifth house, ninth house, do something, get active, exhaust that energy. Because fire moons need to be active. They need to feel like, oh, there's a goal, and I did physical activity to get to that goal, and that feels good. That's actually calming. And for Earth Moon, that's Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, or second house, sixth house, 10th house. Organize, plan, clean, move stuff around, or get grounded. I would say for Earth Moons, sometimes going out in nature also helps a lot. For Air Moon, Gemini, Libra, Aquarius, or in third house, seventh house, ninth house, you want to share, talk, interact, get reflected. So pretty much bounce ideas back and forth. And, sometimes I have an air moon, so I know. Sometimes, it's hard to just call up somebody and say, hey, do you have time for a cup of coffee, for me to just reflect and spit out what I need to spit out. When there's actually no one around, what you can do is do a recording, a recording and listening practice. So basically talk into the voice recorder on your phone, and then play it back and listen. And then respond to that yourself, and then play it back and listen. Of course, you listen from a place of compassion, of equanimity, and then you respond from self-compassion. But that, at least for me, that actually works really well. Water moon, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces, or fourth house, eighth house, 12th house placements have to immerse into something, immerse something that's greater than yourself. So soak in water, or go on a retreat somewhere where it's just you and step away from the situation, or do something that really soothes you. And the interesting thing with water moon is that sometimes it gets too emotional and energetic, that it becomes harder to get back into the body. So I would actually recommend body work for water moons, if at all possible, or accessible. Do some body work, or, just use some sort of acupressure techniques to really bring yourself back to the body. That really helps too. And again, if you want to learn more about your moon signs, Cafe Astrology has descriptions on that for you to learn more about it. Okay. All right, another, I think, very useful stress relieving method for 2024 is the EFT tapping method, because this year, Cancer ascendant year, we can become just unknowingly defensive, or emotions can rise up very suddenly, and we could be experiencing just overwhelm and anxiety without us consciously knowing, or even when it's conscious, it could be at a scale where it feels like we're so triggered that there's no way for me to concentrate back, or for me to reach neutrality very easily. So if the emotions are high, doesn't matter which emotion, as long as it's sort of a icky, negative emotion where it's you're just what is that term, cycling downwards. Just do the tapping. I find this to be a really quick way to release the stress, release the pressure within minutes. So it's just, as the method suggests, it's just tapping. You would tap through karate chop, and then, the eyebrow, inner eyebrows, the side of the eye, under nose, chin, and then collarbone, under the arm, and then back to the top of the head. And while you do that, you go through a set of script for you to first recognize your emotion. That's what I love about EFT tapping, emotional freedom technique tapping, is that it's not pushing the emotions away. It's we establish the emotion first, and we tap to really recognize it first before we move on to the positive emotions that we actually want to experience. So this method actually recognizes emotion and allows for a natural return, a smooth return to emotional neutrality and equilibrium. And it works very, very fast. It doesn't sort of get to a long-term resolution if there are long-term issues, long-term chronic content involved, but it relieves that emotional buildup in the moment so that we can apply the prefrontal cortex thinking and logic into actual problem solving, or to be calm enough to be able to reach our partner, to be able to acknowledge our partner, to be in the middle with our partner without throwing our tantrums around. Because I have done it. Everyone's done it. Like, we don't want to throw tantrums around, but we can't stop that train. So from my experience, real experience, EFT has stopped that train for me many times. And I recommend this YouTuber. He's actually not a YouTuber. I wouldn't even use that term, but he is popular, Tapping with Brad. I just find his videos so helpful in my times of need, times of emotional blowups. His website, Tap with Brad, or you can find him on YouTube. Just search Tap with Brad. He's right there. And he's been online. He's been making videos for over a decade. So you can find almost all topics on his YouTube channel. So I've tapped on anger, anxiety. I've tapped on, family relationships with Brad. What are the other things? Grief. I think he has a video series on going through crisis, which I'm sure would be helpful for a lot of people as well. So just a free plug for him, because he's helped me so much. And I really feel like it would be another tool. This is going to be another tool alongside wise and skillful vulnerability to keep at the shallow end of your pocket this year. It would come really useful, I think. Okay, so let's go into the summary of 2024. So compassion is key for Cancer ascendant year with a Venus focus. Excuse me. So again, practice wise and skillful vulnerability, and share honestly under the right time, environment, and circumstances. Establish that safety zone together, and then share. And then practice self-compassion when you're feeling overwhelmed or feeling defensive. It's so easy to be self-victimizing in a Cancer year. We're going to feel like we're martyrs, and like unwillingly, we're going to want to retaliate. So when that happens, do your moon, do self-care, practice self-compassion enough to give yourself what you need in that moment. And I find that I do want to make that distinction because self-compassion isn't just frou-frou or trying to soothe yourself in that moment. Self-compassion is also fierce, as in when you find yourself going down the downward spiral, fierce self-compassion is actually to sort of give yourself that needed push, that needed pressure to take yourself out for a walk, to release that tension, to do something. I feel like when we're in that downward spiral, it's always helpful to go into action towards something. So self-compassion isn't passive. I just want to make that clear. When, we're at that 0 hour, it's -0. This is the last straw. We're at the end of our wits. Self-compassion will look active. Make ourselves, there's a sense of making ourselves start that momentum, that little push of momentum to come up again. So it could be, pushing ourselves to go out for a walk, pushing ourselves to get into the bathtub and soak in water, or pushing ourselves to finally clean out that closet or finally clean out our desk, something like that. It's actually active. So when you find that you can't get to that place of self-compassion quick enough, use tapping to shift that mood, and shift that perspective in order to build enough emotional reserves. 2024, we're going to be rebuilding our emotional reserves, which is great. And there are more opportunities to see our own unmet needs this year. Again, along the Cancer ascendant theme, we're going to be seeing our unmet needs. Along with Chiron in the 10th house conjuncting North Node, old wounds are going to come up. They're going to point us towards where we have unmet needs. And they come up so we can learn more about ourselves, practice self-care. And it's really not about indulgence, but noticing when we consciously or unconsciously sabotage our own well-being. So, for example, it could be like, okay, I know the way to be self-compassionate. For me, the way to self-care, where I have a need to go on a meditation retreat every year. But I always talk myself out of it because maybe there are financial concerns or maybe there's scheduling concerns, and I end up not doing it. So the point really is to see, to notice what's happening, and to really get down to what those unmet needs are. And we're not playing on the surface, as in if it's, because of finances that I'm not going. We're not staying on that surface level of, oh, my unmet need is lack of money. No, we go down, we investigate a little more into it and say, okay, I'm feeling lack. So what's behind that feeling of lack? Is it that, oh, I'm actually not taking breaks regularly, so I end up having to section off a chunk of my time to do the retreat, whereas what I needed was actually, a break every 2 hours, or, a 15-minute break in the morning and 15-minute break, make myself take that government mandated break morning and afternoon. Maybe it's that. So investigate into the real unmet needs beneath the surface. So there are opportunities for us to really understand what those needs are this year. And these are opportunities. And as we're talking about with Chiron in the 10th house, the wounds are out in the open this year. So you will clearly see it. The opportunity will be clearly there for you to see it. And because it is 10th house, other people can see it. I'm on the same boat, don't worry. So this is the opportunity to work on it without shame, without self-blame, because again, everyone is on the same boat, given the same opportunity. And again, this comes down to being able to build that emotional reserve. So we feel foundationally secure, emotionally secure, in order for us to facilitate change, to facilitate a better form of partnership, to better facilitate how we want to be in the world and how we want to be with each other. It's for that purpose. So sometimes we have to walk through fire to get to the other side. We have to walk through darkness to see the light. So this is one of those years where the coin has two sides. The light is there, empathy is there, the mutuality is there. The only thing is we have to walk through our own wounds to be effective in giving and receiving empathy, and giving and receiving in a healthy partnership relationship, and to really make the connections in your life work, because life really is about connections, isn't it? Okay. So in business or personal situations, aim for meaningful and potentially private discussions, the discussions on the side when needed, and stored the quality of exchange. Notice the quality of exchange. It's definitely quality over quantity. And innovate the partnerships and adjust direction as you go without expectations or fixation on an outcome. So what do I mean by without expectations? This is really important because, again, I was recently tapping with Brad, and one of the videos was on how he signs off his communications and emails with expect miracles, instead of be well, which is such a banal thing. It goes beyond expectations for us to expect miracles. So when I say don't go into or don't project partnerships towards your expectations, when I say that, it's about not expecting the old paradigms to just repeat itself and fixate on an outcome that just repeats the same paradigms. I'm saying to have that intention to be open to miracles that can come through, something that we've never even thought of. So expect those miracles, expect to be shown what you would never be able to expect using your human brain. And that's what I mean by innovating partnerships or allowing the direction of partnerships to be open to what's new, to be open to what we would never, ever think of. That's what I mean. It means expect miracles. Do not expect old paradigms, but expect miracles. Okay, so at its best, 2024 carries the energy and spirit of Ubuntu, I am because we are, but at its worst, it's trigger happy and defensive. So actively practice self-compassion as we may start ruminate past hurts. I mean, a lot of times we already do, but again, it happens in public this time. Just in one way or another, and of course in varying degrees, depending on how much we've worked through those hurts. So as we have this focus of reestablishing our place in the world with our new potential identity that's more based on sort of a partnership identity or group identity, our wounds can get triggered. Our past wounds can get triggered, and to deter those partnerships. And again, it's going to be out in the open. So watch to see if we're in a state of openness, of emotional security, enough to connect with the other person, or are we in fearful projections in a partnership? Sort of, I guess, the equivalent of that in sort of a personal relationship would be fear of intimacy because of some sort of PTSD experience. So, but here's the point. It's supposed to come up this year. It's supposed to be there this year. And we have the energies available there for us to heal it this year and to bring back a sense of emotional equanimity this year, to come back to balance. So practice awareness and self-compassion, be open to the two-way street, and build rapport through consistency without pushing for results. It needs to be a two-way street this year. You put in something, I put in something, and we integrate our ideas and see what comes up. And then you put in something, I put in something, we integrate again and see what comes up. And if, my own fear gets triggered, then, I do my moon, do the tapping to release that anxiety, to release the PTSD, to release the past stories, and then, practice practice self-compassion, whatever it is that I need to do for self-care, and then be sort of emotionally padded to a certain point to come back to the conversation in a conducive way. So that's how the energy can play out very harmoniously this year. So I know I mentioned a lot about self-compassion this year just because, in a Cancer ascendant year, it's very compassion focused. So if you're interested, I did a video on the basics of self-compassion, and it's based on Kristin Neff's teachings. Kristin Neff is a researcher and an expert on self-compassion. So I've sort of reorganized her material from a retreat that she did, I think June of this year, 2023, into a webinar form. And it's all organized. So the video is longish, like 2 hours almost, but they are titled, separated into different sections in the YouTube description or the content description on YouTube. So if you're only interested in a part of the topic, just click into that topic. Okay. That's a resource. So thank you. That is my presentation on 2024's forecast, again, for the West Coast, for those in the Pacific time zone. And I hope that was helpful. Have a great 2024. And remember this year, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, meet in the middle. Okay, so with that, I'll close my presentation here. Feel free to come back and refer to these slides if you want a refresher. Thank you. I wish you a prosperous, happy, and joyful year. Namaste.